All right, well, here's the good news. The TSA is finally cracking down on potential crackpot airport workers. The bad news, well, it's still leaving a lot of cracks. Trace, on the case. Hey, Trace.
Neil, the TSA report dealing with those insider threats like airport employees who have access to baggage and airplanes has now concluded that fully screening all airport employees would be, 1, too expensive, and 2, would not lower the risk to the overall public, saying that fully screening employees is, quote, incapable of determining a person's motives, attitudes, and capabilities to cause harm, among other limitations. But it certainly might have picked up the guns that a Delta airline ramp worker was busted for smuggling onto flights back in December. And just last week, we were reminded of the astounding and often unsupervised access ramp workers have to flights when that baggage handler fell asleep in the cargo hold of an Alaska Airlines flight and then woke up after the plane took off. So now, instead of screening all employees, TSA will conduct random employee screenings and increase the background checks on aviation employees, you know, the ones who actually handle the aircraft. The report also calls for more surveillance cameras in baggage rooms and cargo areas and to start encouraging employees to report any type of security issues. Kind of surprising that one wasn't already in the playbook. Neil.
Yeah, I think. All right, Trace, thank you. And all this time we've been focusing on the guys getting on the planes. Is it already too late to focus on all the guys working on those planes? Derek Stackerback, Pat Brosnan. Patrick, what do you think?
Well, I think it takes a lot of rethinking, Neil. The fact is that there's stricter parameters today in place for vetting and screening, say, a bank employee or a visiting nurse than airline employees to mitigate the threat of the insider threat by these airline employees. Bank employees, visiting nurses, much stricter parameters. The whole concept of just a criminal history, that's outdated thinking. First of all, criminal histories only go back 7 years by FCRA rules.
Right.
But even worse, criminal histories, what we're looking for with a criminal history with these individuals is not a larceny, something that would be relevant if they were taking a retail store job as a cashier.
Right.
We're looking for criminal history that would suggest treasonous behavior. It's not going to be there.
But, you know, Eric, I'm worrying about, forget their history, what they're doing on the job when they're on the job. In other words, if we've got guys who fall asleep, and they might have no real ill will, but if we can't track what they're doing on the job now, forget about where they came from before they got the job.
It seems like a vulnerable place, Neil, in many ways to have the lack of screening. And I think of 3 cases in particular when it comes to potential terrorism, Neil. Back in the fall, we had a case of a guy fighting with ISIS in Syria who was killed over there. He had worked at Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. We had a case in 2007 where an Islamic terrorist plotted to blow up JFK Airport in New York. And we had a case in London back in 2010, Neil, where an employee at the airport was plotting to carry out attacks against Heathrow. So I think the security should be stringent at every level, whether it's a pilot, whether it's a janitor, whether it's the guy working at McDonald's in the airport. We need to be very, very stringent about this.
Pat, I assume from the guys who handle the luggage to, you know, everyone who works, you know, on the front line that at airports, that they are going through the same security process.
Well, the security process, an element of it, as Eric points out, is also that these cursory, these vapor background checks, these very rudimentary checks that have been in place for years, they don't apply today in 2015 to mitigate an insider threat.
So are you encouraged by this or no?
Well, it's the same. Look, we gave the keys to the venue that facilitated 9/11. These guys have the keys. We have to look at them a lot closer than we look at a bank employee in terms of parameters of the search.
All right, guys, with all this breaking news, I'm sorry to constrict our time here, but when politicians whine about the economy, I'm not talking about these Republican ones. I'm talking about this Democratic one.